Hello and welcome to World Konnect. This is where you get the latest from around the world. Now, Pakistan's lies are getting exposed again and again, and this time it is from its own political class. On the other hand, blame game over the Syrian crisis continues as the US cancelled talks with Russia this week. The Nobel Peace Prize was also announced, and India paid homage to Mahatma Gandhi by ratifying the Paris climate deal officially. This and much more in today's episode. But before that, let's get you the top stories. Hurricane Matthew leaves hundreds dead in Haiti. One of the poorest countries now grapples with the after effects of the powerful storm. After 73 countries ratify it, Paris Climate Agreement all set to begin in November this year. President Obama terms the deal a turning point. In a rare dare, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif reprimands army generals for providing support to terrorists as global pressure mounts on Islamabad. Colombian President wins the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to seal a peace deal with the FARC rebels. The surprise announcement follows a referendum rejection of the agreement by Colombians. And Portugal's former PM Antonio Guterres set to be the next UN Secretary General. A clear favourite, Guterres led the UN Refugee Agency for 10 years. Well, Hurricane Matthew's trail of destruction in Haiti stunned those emerging from the aftermath on Friday, with the number of dead crossing 800, tens of thousands rendered homeless, and outbreaks of cholera already claiming more lives. Many others are missing, with rescue agencies saying that it would take some time to ascertain the actual loss by the hurricane. Now, rehabilitation now stares hard at one of the poorest countries in the world.
An eerie face was spotted on a satellite image as Hurricane Matthew, the most powerful storm in the Caribbean in a decade, left a trail of destruction along western Haiti. The hurricane created havoc and wreckage in the area. Blowing at 193 kilometers per hour, it leveled homes and important structures. A pivotal bridge was destroyed on Tuesday, which left the southwest of the Central American country largely cut off. Now, one of the poorest ones in the world grapples with the after effects of the powerful storm. With communication lines down and no electricity in many regions, the authorities now have a huge task of rescue and rehabilitation. The picturesque areas of the country are now scenes of devastation with uprooted trees and flooded streets. The relief camps are also running out of food, water and medical supply, even as the residents are gearing up to rebuild lost structures. Authorities have also postponed a presidential election originally planned for Sunday to focus on the aid operations. The hurricane pounded Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica and the Dominican Republic.
After leaving behind a trail of destruction in Haiti, Hurricane Matthew lashed Florida, causing damage throughout the city. Now, Matthew, potentially the first major hurricane to hit the United States head-on in more than a decade, triggered mass evacuations along the coast from Florida through Georgia and into South Carolina and North Carolina. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has been chosen for the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize for working tirelessly to bring an end to the 52-year-long war with FARC rebels. The bloody war has claimed nearly 2.5 lakh lives, with more than 6 million internally displaced. The Nobel Committee in Norway praised Santos for the peace agreement with the left-wing rebels. It was signed last month in Cuban capital Havana after 4 years of negotiations. Now, halfway through his first 4-year term, Santos staked his reputation and political future on the new round of peace talks. Santos was re-elected in 2014 on promises that peace would bolster economic growth and that he would continue to reduce unemployment and poverty. A bilateral ceasefire and end to hostilities were signed in June this year, with the complete peace accord published in August. He signed the accord with FARC commander Timochenko on the 26th of September. Interestingly, the surprise Nobel announcement follows the rejection of the peace deal in a referendum by Colombians last week. However, it isn't as bad as it seems, because there is a sense that the award will encourage peacemakers to carry on despite obstacles. Now, Colombian President Santos winning the Nobel Peace Prize follows a big disappointment for him at home. The peace deal with FARC rebels was rejected narrowly in a referendum. But unfazed by the plebiscite result, Santos vowed to bring peace to his country and expressed determination for a new round of talks.
Hordes of Colombian students dressed in white, waving white flags and banners with slogans favoring peace written on them, marched in Bogota to call for amity from the FARC. Not just these students, but many in the country were left stunned and shocked after a surprise no vote that rejected a peace deal with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC. No voters narrowly won last week's plebiscite by 50.21% to 49.76% favoring yes. The opponents of the deal termed it too lenient, that proposed a safe window to those accused of killings and serious crimes without serving jail sentences. Another point of contention was a monthly payment promised to FARC rebels for shunning arms. The deal was also slammed for provisions of allowing rebels to enter mainstream politics by forming a political party. The referendum verdict came as a big blow to President Juan Manuel Santos, who campaigned hard for a yes vote. Santos had kept FARC peace deal among his top priorities. As uncertainty prevailed over the ongoing ceasefire and the future of the peace deal, Santos's administration reopened talks with the rebels. Former President and current Senator Alvaro Uribe, who was the face of the anti-deal camp, held a meeting with President Santos to discuss the scenario. Critical of the deal, Uribe had fiercely campaigned against it, demanding a corrected peace agreement. In their first meeting in 5 years, President Santos and Uribe vowed to continue talks to salvage the peace pact.
Colombianos, estamos muy cerca, muy cerca.
Colombians, we are very close to achieving peace, a stable and lasting peace with wide support from the nation. If everyone has the will and contributes with responsibility, understanding of reality, we will achieve it.
Con responsabilidad.
Reiteramos la necesidad.
We reiterate that the necessity of FARC accepting their crimes and that their members receiving protection.
Expresamos al gobierno soluciones jurídicas y económicas.
Opponents are demanding that the fresh agreement should contain guarantees for FARC rebel fighters, but strict penalties for commanders responsible for war crimes. Preparing to hand over their arms for months, the rebels have no clue of what happens next. Many fear that guerrilla fighters may go back to the jungles and rearm themselves if a too harsh and unfavorable draft is finalized. What happens next is yet to unfold, but the fact which remains undisputed is, in Colombia, everyone wants peace, be it a yes advocate or a no voice.
Living through an age of industrial capitalism, Mahatma Gandhi had warned of the dangers that come along with the exploitation of natural resources. India ratified the historic Paris Climate Deal, joining the world in its commitment towards wholesome development, one that includes a healthy and sustainable environment.
With India's recent move of ratifying the Paris Climate Deal, a total of 62 countries that account for around 52% emissions have now ratified the accord. 14 other countries, representing 12% of global emissions, have committed to ratifying the pact before the end of this year. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said that now words should be put into deeds and that every part of society must be mobilized to reduce emissions. Not just India, several other countries have promised timely implementation of the Paris deal. Getting the agreement executed is a strategic objective that President Barack Obama has set for himself before he leaves office in less than 4 months. United States and China, the world's two largest emitters, both ratified the agreement in September. The accord would begin from the 4th of November. At least 73 nations, accounting for nearly 57% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, will be fully committed. The Paris Climate Deal commits countries to ensure that the average global temperature does not rise 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Since carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are the biggest cause of man-made climate change, the agreement aims to shift world economy away from fossil fuels in an effort to reduce floods, droughts and rising sea levels. Green groups have welcomed the move and urged governments to align global energy and economic policies. The deal calls for 195 signatories to come up with their own plans to reduce emissions. Even though individual pledges are unlikely to be sufficient to stay within the 2-degree limit, the fact that the process has begun is a positive step towards solving the problem and leaving a better world for our children.
Portugal's former Prime Minister Antonio Guterres will take over as the new Secretary General of the United Nations. The 67-year-old was elected unanimously, and now the final approval rests with the 193-member General Assembly.
Portugal's former Prime Minister António Guterres will take over the reins from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon from 2017. Guterres, who has also served as the chief of the UNHCR, is all set to take over the top post after the Security Council, in the 6th straw poll, declared him to be the unanimous choice. The Security Council's decision will then be sent to the 193-member General Assembly for final formal approval. Guterres was up against former Serbian Foreign Minister Vuk Jeremic, UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova of Bulgaria, European Commissioner Kristalina Georgieva, Slovakia's Miroslav Liacek, Argentina's Foreign Minister Susana Malcorra, and UNDP head and former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark, among others. Guterres emerged as the front-runner since the first straw polls conducted in April and remained one throughout the contest, even as there was a growing call for a female chief. There was also a push for an Eastern European candidate, but tension between Russia and the US in the Ukraine situation and diplomatic tiffs over Syria prevented a consensus. Following which, the 15-nation council, including the 5 permanent members with veto powers, decided on one of Europe's internationally renowned politicians, Guterres.
Gratitude, but also humility. Humility when facing the dramatic problems of today's world, and humility that is needed to serve, and especially to serve those that are most vulnerable, the victims of conflict, of terrorism, the victims of the violation of rights, the victims of poverty and the injustices of this world.
67-year-old António Guterres, with a wide range of experience handling diplomatic and global crises, has also handled migrant issues as the chief of the UNHCR, a primary challenge which he would have to address in his new portfolio. He will also have to tackle climate change issues, Middle East crisis, and civil unrest in parts of Africa.
This year's Nobel Prize for Medicine, Physics and Chemistry have been announced, while a trio has been honored each for physics and chemistry on their work on matter and molecules. A Japanese scientist has been recognized for his path-breaking research on cells recycling themselves. Now, the study, many believe, would help in the prevention and treatment of several diseases challenging mankind.
A study of cells degrading and recycling their components has won the 2016 Nobel Prize for Medicine. Japan's Yoshinori Osumi came up with a discovery about the secrets of how cells can remain healthy by recycling waste, the process known as autophagy. Osumi's work, carried out in the 1990s and described by commentators as paradigm-shifting and pioneering, included locating the genes that regulate autophagy. This is important for medicine because it helps show why errors in these genes can contribute to a range of diseases like cancer, Parkinson's, and type 2 diabetes. The work also helped explain crucial processes in human development, from growing up to aging to succumbing to disease, and will lead to treatment of many diseases.
But in order to get the new structures in place, you have to get rid of the old stuff. So this is very important in physiology. Without it, you cannot grow up. So for adults, same thing happens. You have, when you undergo aging, you have structures that has to be taken away, and this autophagy is the principle to get rid of it.
The work on molecular machines that may lead to developments like new materials, sensors and energy storage systems has bagged the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. The French, Scottish and Dutch trio of Jean-Pierre Sauvage, J. Fraser Stoddart and Bernard Feringa had developed molecules with controllable movements that can perform tasks when energy is added. The discovery could one day be injected to fight cancer. In the field of physics, British-born scientists David Thouless, Duncan Haldane and Michael Kosterlitz won the 2016 Nobel Prize for studies of unusual states of matter. The study may open up new applications in electronics. Their discoveries using advanced mathematics had boosted research in condensed matter physics and raised hopes for users in new generations of electronics and superconductors or future quantum computers.
Rattled by its global isolation, Pakistan Premier Nawaz Sharif is said to have confronted his army generals for providing support to terrorists. Now, even though this is being termed as a gimmick, the news has ripped open Pakistan's Achilles heel. Take a look at this report.
In a rare development termed as a gamble by Nawaz Sharif-led civilian government of Pakistan, army generals have been rebuked for their support and assistance to terrorist groups. The development follows Pakistan's global isolation on the issue of cross-border terrorism. Pakistan has been providing safe havens and acting as a facilitator to terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Haqqani network. LET and JEM have masterminded a number of major terror attacks in India, while the Haqqani operates in Afghanistan, adding to the instability in the war-torn nation. As per the government's orders, ISI Director General Rizwan Akhtar, accompanied by National Security Advisor Nasir Janjua, will travel to all provinces to convey that military-led intelligence agencies should not interfere if law enforcement agencies act against terrorist groups. This followed an open and extraordinary verbal confrontation between Punjab Chief Minister and the ISI DG. After last month's attack by Pakistan-based terrorists on an army camp in Uri in Jammu and Kashmir, India stepped up efforts to isolate Pakistan internationally. This resulted in all-round criticism of Pakistan and demands for acting tough on terrorism. A number of countries like Russia, Germany, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and a major grouping of nations, European Union backed India on surgical strikes which were conducted by the Indian Army across LOC to eliminate terrorists. Another major blow for Pakistan came as the postponement of the FARC summit, which was proposed to be held in Islamabad after nearly all member countries refused to attend it. The regional snub to Pakistan comes when its ties with Western allies have already been souring, giving its failure to tackle terror groups. In fact, inner voices in the country have demanded a visible ground action by the government. Nawaz Sharif's party colleague and lawmaker Rana Muhammad Afzal asked, "Which eggs is Hafiz Saeed laying for us that we are nurturing him?" He also said, "The efficacy of our foreign policy speaks for itself when we couldn't curtail Hafiz Saeed." Hafiz Saeed is the founder of Lashkar-e-Toiba and the chief of Jamaat-ud-Dawa's terrorist groups. The global outrage on terrorism and growing sentiment against Pakistan might have led to Nawaz Sharif's rebuff to powerful generals. Pakistan's army has governed the country on 3 occasions for a total of more than 3 decades since its independence in 1947. A general perception about Pakistan is that the country has 2 power centers, the civilian government and the army, with the latter enjoying a bigger authority and power. In such a scenario, Nawaz Sharif's message to Pakistan is also seen by many as a mere gimmick aimed at a political and global image building.
The blame game between Russia and the US continued over the Syrian crisis. US had suspended peace talks, saying Russia was not committed to the ceasefire agreement. The State Department also said that the US is looking for non-diplomatic options to resolve the situation. Russia has, on the other hand, said it is disappointed with the US decision and that they are just trying to shift the blame. They've also stated that the United States should carefully consider the consequences of strikes on Syrian army positions. Meanwhile, the 5-year-long civil war in Aleppo intensified over the week, with the Assad government stepping up its offensive in the region to reclaim it from rebels. Israel on Thursday attacked militant targets in the Gaza Strip, wounding at least 1 person. Israeli military said it was in response to a rocket fired from the enclave, which hit a border town, and blamed Hamas for it. In another development, Israel said the new houses being built in the occupied West Bank did not constitute a new settlement, dismissing a strong US condemnation of the project. Now, the United States had sharply criticized Israel over plans to build a new Jewish settlement in the West Bank and said that it would damage prospects for peace with the Palestinians. And after that, let's take a look at some other events making headlines around the world. A group of builders in France are not building skyscrapers, hotels or restaurants. They are building castles, not in air, but in the sleepy town of Burgundy. These builders are taking inspiration from ancient European heritage to create sustainable structures in the modern world.
Asked to visualize the Europe of the 13th century, the first structure that will pop up in the minds of many are the huge castles. The architectural mysteries of the strong buildings that have lasted for centuries are always a wonder. Deep in the forests of northern Burgundy, a team of master builders in France are just seeking to uncover that. The Guterres castle being built from scratch, the way it would have been back in time. The builders used medieval methods to transform the site's rich presence of stone, clay, water, wood and sand into a castle. They believe that this will help them study methods for sustainable buildings in the modern world.
What's good about what we are doing here is that it's also going to help us restore existing heritage, ancient heritage. And so if we really use the same techniques as those from the Middle Ages, then for a church, a castle, for anything, it will be a great restoration and conservation solution.
The construction of this unique project started in 1997 and is expected to be completed in the 2020s. It has also drawn hundreds of castle enthusiasts, complete novices and students to the site each year. More than the castle, the focus is on builders and the construction of the castle. Those involved hope of going on to create an entire medieval village.
Before you complain about not having something in life next time, make sure you remember Robaba Mohammadi, an Afghan teenager who is partially paralyzed but strokes canvases from her mouth. With beautiful paintings and a message of peace, Robaba is defining the term differently abled every day.
16-year-old Robaba Mohammadi wields the pencil with her mouth to make detailed lifelike sketches. Having started drawing just before 2 years, her talent for art is visible in the minute features of the pictures. Robaba was born with partial paralysis of her limbs and is unable to control her hands and feet except for a few toes.
Before I start drawing, I was hopeless, and when my sisters and brothers were going to school, I was so depressed, I was even crying 2 or 3 times a day.
Among her portraits are those of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, an Afghan-born Canadian politician Marion Monsef, whom she looks up to. Mohammadi's dream now is to hold an international art exhibition in Toronto's Aga Khan Museum.
Robaba doesn't have hands for drawing, but God had granted her the ability to draw with her mouth. She is doing a very impossible task, and before, we didn't think she could do it. Now we are hopeful she can improve a lot in her career.
Robaba Mohammadi, through her art, not only wants to make a career, but through her pencil, hopes to show the world a different picture of Afghanistan, beyond its struggle of conflict and war.
Well, this brings us to the end of this edition of World Konnect. Do send us your feedback. You can write to us. Our email ID is worldkonnect.ddnews@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, that is World Konnect DD, or get onto our Facebook page. But before we go, we take you to Italy, where a concert was held on the famous Spanish Steps to inaugurate the Roman landmark after its restoration work. Take a look at it. Thanks for joining in. Namaskar.